Good afternoon and welcome to our work session. Leading our pledge this evening will be Board Member Jim Estes.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Estes, and we will use a moment of silence on Thursday night. Please. Okay. As far as approval of the agenda, any questions on the agenda? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to questions on the consent agenda. Mr. Odom, I do want to compliment the coaches or athletic directors, who's ever responsible, because I think we're out of the chute with the volunteers pretty quick this time. So there's a long list of volunteers to be approved, and of course they've gone through background checks and approval of the administrators. So I guess we're good there. And you still have another opportunity on Thursday night if a question arises between now and that time. So we'll move on to, of course, you'll be introducing some promotions and a new member of our program, and that's always fun to introduce them to the public. Would like to remind the board that Ms. Blair is of no relation to me, unless you go back with her husband's name back to Scotland. So that's where it traces back to. So she earned that on her own. Number 8.
Number 8 is continuing our old business. This was the CPR and first aid training. On April 16, 2015, the board approved a motion to require 50% of each athletic/activity staff to be certified in both CPR and first aid as of August 1st, 2015. By June 1st, 2016, all members of athletic activity staff would be required to be certified in both. Athletics were defined as all TSSAA and TMSAA sanctioned sports, including swimming. Activities were defined as marching band and junior ROTC. Mr. Tackett met with the athletic directors on May 12, 2015 to discuss adjusting the board action concerning coverage ratios for CPR and first aid certification of coaches sponsors. The definitions for athletics and activities would remain the same, and the August 1st, 2015 compliance date would remain the same under the new model. The revision requires at least one CPR and first aid certified coach or sponsor for athletic events and practices. And the first motion was to rescind the board action taken on April 16th, 2015 regarding CPR first aid certifications for athletic and activity coaches and sponsors. And the second motion was to approve a revised coach-sponsor model requiring at least one CPR and first aid certified coach sponsor for all athletic events and practices, marching band, and junior ROTC with a compliance date of August 1st, 2015.
Mr. Chairman, I took a look at this and made a couple of suggestions to Mr. Tackett and Director Odom, and even talked with Angel McLeod a little bit about this. The board has a policy in place where we ask for all students to be educated in a safe environment, and I think we may be entering into a place here, and the conversation that I had with staff, I'll let them chime in as well. We may be better served holding the policy that the board has of having a safe environment and allowing for the details of this CPR training to be handled in administrative policy, administrative practices. And for that reason, I'm moving in the direction, of course, our work session is an opportunity for us to discuss it, but I'm moving in the direction of offering a motion Thursday evening that we would rescind the board action taken on April 16th, 2015 in favor of the board's will being addressed under administrative practices by the director of schools.
Do you have a comment?
You know, one thing we do have, administrative procedures or practices is basically how to interpret policies and things that you already have in place, steps to do that. I think we have your intention, basically, that we do get all this staff trained, but at least at every practice, every competitive event, at least one person must be there training in CPR and first aid. And we can put that in administrative procedures. Ms. McLeod handles that, but we can write it in the same way. I mean, I'd want to make sure we hear anything from you that you wanted added before we do, so we can put it out.
And I talked to Mr. Tackett as well, and he and Mr. Holliday had talked about moving it to administrative procedure or practices, and his opinion was that, of course, he made it clear to me that he was no longer on the board and he did not make policy, but he did mention that having it in administrative procedures, that if the board saw an issue and could address it with you, or if the central office or the athletic director saw an issue, then you could tweak that without having to wait for the board to meet. And
We can add something to it or
Right.
something we need to do by reissuing. You know, Mr. Hodge he had some possible suggestions last time too, so
I'm open, my main concern is just make sure we get somebody out there that
I agree.
need, and how we get there, I'm fine with it, as long as I know it's being done, that's my concern.
yes, sir.
Whether we have to create something as a board, or allow the staff to do it, as long as it's being done. Mr. Reed and Mr. McLeod are good with doing it this way. If they both feel comfortable with it, I'm good with it. I'll go along with it.
I can see that it would streamline the process being under your guidance, again, rather than being under board policy, where we would, if you saw a situation they needed to change, rather than having to come back to the board and change it, you could go ahead and take corrective action immediately.
which we do sometimes even as state law or rules and regs will change or something like that. So if we can handle it in those, we go ahead and make that change. If you decide to add another, swimming is not TSSAA, but we've got it specified in here, you know. So, but if we saw a need to do another one or something like that, we can handle it. You know.
Based on Mr. Hodges' comment, Mr. Reed, Ms. McLeod, any comment that you would like to make, or are you happy with it going to administrative procedure?
I think that's a more appropriate place for it to be.
Okay.
There's a number of things that I know Mr. Hodge has the Tennessee legislative thing, but they have started legislating lots of things that's really procedural. You know, and it could be in the state's rules and regs or something like that, but we've kind of got into, at the state level, passing a new law for everything, and it's just unusual. That seems to be more of a recent change than I had seen in the past.
The one thing that I would like to see is I would like to see all coaches have to go through it.
We can put that in.
Because I know what's gonna happen if we don't. The head coach and a couple of assistants are gonna pick 2 or 3 to go through and get it, and then next thing you know, they've gotta leave early and there's nobody there. If every coach has it, they can't have practice if there's no coach there.
Let's put that in there, Ms. McLeod, when we do. We'll include that, all coaches. Which was what the original intention anyway was to do half by August 1st and then the other by another year, the rest of them would be trained. That was the original.
Would you be
Design.
acceptable?
I could live with that, yeah.
So, instead of having to try to do it all at once.
You
if
might not be able to get them all by this August 1st, is there just enough sessions and all? That's a whole lot of coaches.
Mr. Hodge?
We also need to make sure that we're including the band deal. I don't think we need to specify just coaches. I don't know if you do band director or whatever. The main intent is to make sure there's always somebody out. Yes, sir. And I like that idea, I mean, to have the coaches, but also the band directors too, and we're going to go down that way. I'm good with, like I said, I'm good with as long as I know somebody out there is on the, at the practices, at the games that is, qualified for this.
And for those listen, some people listen to us on television or something, our nursing staff, which are RNs and all and trained, are being able to do the cross-training to do this. So that's, we can do most of this in-house.
Would we do 50% in the fall and then come back in the second semester?
Let me check with Sarah Delbridge and see if we need to do 2 dates or something, how far along we are in the training and how many sessions they have. Let me kind of ask her one more time to see, you know, if I'm fine to have half of them by August 1st if that's doable.
Okay. But would the end date be that by the end of the next school year, all would be?
By the start of the 16 year, I would
Okay.
say they all should have it. So
Is that
that was
satisfactory?
our original intent, that they would have at least half or more for now, and then by everybody by, and you're gonna have a constant turnover of coaches.
Right.
So you're gonna have training every year.
Does that meet the desire of the board? Anything else on this? We're moving on to number 9.
Number 9 is facilities, and it's a water line easement for Riverdale High School Fieldhouse Building. Jeff Reed, the Rutherford County School Board Attorney, forwarded a proposed water line easement from the city of Murfreesboro requesting easement for the water line that will serve the new board-approved fieldhouse at Riverdale High School. The proposed easement starts at the existing water and sewer easement at the south corner of the auxiliary building outside the pool area. It proceeds west to the new field house. The easement is approximately 20 feet wide by 285 feet long, covering approximately 5,700 square feet of school property. The proposed easement does not appear to conflict with any other utilities. The recommend approval. The motion is to approve the request for waterline easement from the board to the city of Murfreesboro for the board-approved field house at Riverdale High School as presented. Jeff Reed will complete the final documentation for the easement.
Any questions? Of course, Mr. Reed is here. Okay. Number 10.
Number 10 is transportation. A is per Section 8 of the bus contract, which covers assignability of a contract from the contract holder to another individual. The Transportation Department has received a letter from Nicole Smith, contractor of bus number 205, requesting that her mother, Deborah Swader, receive bus number 205 route due to health reasons. Ms. Smith has held a contract with Rutherford County Schools since 2006. Ms. Swader is the contractor of bus number 83 and has been a contractor for over 20 years. And the motion will be to approve the contract for bus number 205 be transferred from Nicole Smith to Deborah Swader effective immediately.
And it has been the historical placement of the Transportation Department to allow family members to transfer their contract in a health issue to a family member. Our Director of Transportation is here. That's a question.
Again, for people that are listening to us, one of the reasoning is they have a substantial investment in that piece of equipment, and sometimes may still owe on that piece of equipment, so that's why the board in the past is, if the contractor was in good standing and not other issues, to look favorably at that because of that investment. B is pursuant to Section 16.1 of the Rutherford County Board of Education bus contract, and Transportation Department has received a letter dated June 18th, 2015, from Katie Schwader, contractor of bus number 61, requesting voluntary termination of her contract with the board. The Transportation Department is preparing to award this contract to the next person on the appropriate priority list. Recommend approval of the motion to approve voluntary termination of bus contract from Katie Schwader, bus number 61, effective as soon as possible. And your list comes up on the next, on C part of this motion.
Any questions? Move on to C.
C is pursuant to policy 3.405 bus contract award procedures. The new contractor list for the 2015-16 school year is as presented. These two lists: first priority, regular bus drivers who have driven for 2 full school years, and second priority, those who currently own 1 or more contracts, are for approval in order to facilitate the awarding of new bus contracts on a timely basis for the beginning of the new school year and thereafter as contracts are turned into the Transportation Department through the year. Recommend approval of the motion to approve the following potential first and second priority bus contractor list for 2015-2016 school year. First priority does have 5 names, and you have a total of 67 names on the second priority list.
Mr. Snell, would you come to the podium and remind the board how this process is carried out? Board members, I need to apologize to Mr. Snell and the board. I had intended to draw the lottery numbers that morning, but prior to that morning, we had a pretty strong storm, and with my profession, I was kind of stuck in the office doing claim work. So again, I apologize for being unable to attend, but looks like you handled it just well without Mr. Snell.
Yes, we had a new Vanna White was supposed to be there that day, but Vanna didn't show. So. But anyway, what we do and how the procedure is set up for the second priority list is those who want to attain another bus contract fills out an application by, in this particular case, I think it was June the 4th, so that information can be assorted and put together. And then on the 9th of June this year, we had the lottery drawing, which is what we do every year with regards to pulling the names in the order of which they will be awarded in the event a contract becomes available. And with 5 names going to be the only number that we have, and we have currently in the budget 6, we'll get past that, as well as we had another one who turned in her contract, Ms. Swader, and she turned her contract in because she was a sped bus contractor and her bus ran out and she didn't want to renew and buy another bus, so that's how that one became available. At any rate, then we at the teacher center this year, we put all the names in a fishbowl, and we had one of the ladies from the teacher center, so an unbiased person, to pull the names out one at a time and went till we got to that, and then we put that list in order. Then what that helps us do is it helps us try, number one, we don't have any way of denoting, quote, seniority-wise when everybody came on board once we get past about 1995 or 1990. Once we get into the 1980s, when some of the contractors came on board, they all like came on board as effective on August in 1988. So there may be 20 or 30. And in my previous profession, we had a timestamp that's how we knew seniority. So there was no way for us to set up seniority-wise to do that. So this allows then us that if somebody's on the first list, I mean, it was at the beginning of the list this year, that person may be on the next list next year. And so, and then by the same token, if you're on the bottom of the list, you wouldn't be there for a few years. You have the opportunity to be in number one. So that's the way the drawing is done, to be as fair as possible. Works out pretty well. I've not had many complaints. Some of them wish they had a seniority-wise, but we don't.
Remind the board as far as the expense that the bus contractors with buying a special ed bus and the number of seats and the large bus and the seats.
Contract calls for transit buses, when that's what we call big buses, to have either 89 or 90 passenger or capacity. And a brand new one will run you somewhere of $100,000 to $105,000. Most contractors, when they buy a new bus, they buy it and they can finance it for 5 years. So once they get through the 5 years, then they're making a pretty good bit of money. But for that first 5 years, it's like any other business. When you first start out, you're not making any money. You're holding on, trying to get there. Special ed bus. It must have at least 21 seats with a wheelchair lift, and it can have up to 28 once we get, and that's in the contract. If you were to allow for more than 28, then you run into issues with trying to pull into people's parking driveways, backing up, those type of things. So we restrict it. Plus, it runs from a time standpoint. That's about all that you can have on the bus and still make that run within an hour and a half, which is the state law that students can be on the bus. That'll run you somewhere in about the $80,000 to $85,000 range.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Snell? Thank you, Mr. Snell.
Thank you.
Several years ago, this was quite an ordeal when we had 3 and 4 lists, I believe. So just icing it down to 2, I think, has made this much more organized and more simple more simplistic, I guess, to keep up with. So, thank you again, Mr. Snell. Number 11, Ms. Paula, the insurance meeting has been canceled for lack of business, basically, correct? Okay. I thought I saw August is the next meeting. I don't think there is one in July. Okay. Yes, ma'am. So next insurance meeting will be in August. Do they ever call an impromptu? Have you ever experienced that? Okay. Okay. Thank you. As far as legislative or the federal issues, if there's something that you would like to speak on, Mr. Hodge or Mr. Holliday, we'll do that in general discussion Thursday night or whenever you desire.
I'm good with Thursday. Everyone has a copy here of some of the things that went through this last session. Some of it's pretty interesting reading, and some of it doesn't make reflective sense. But anyhow, ladies and reading, if they want to discuss anything Thursday, we'll discuss it.
Good. This is nice to have. Thank you, Mr. Hodge. Good. Okay. we'll have some time to look at this between now and Thursday night. Mr. Holliday, I guess if anything occurs between now and Thursday on a federal level, you can share that with us at that time.
I'll let Ms. Joyce know if it does.
There's immediately following this, I think several, if not all of us, are going to the health ed meeting that starts here in just a few minutes at the courthouse. There is also a budget committee meeting tomorrow night. Isn't that correct? At 5:30. So, the big meeting, full commission Friday morning. Is that at 9 o'clock? So, if your schedule allows you to be there, please do. I plan on attending. I'm sure Mr. Odom will be there, and if all board members, as many as possible, can be there, that would be a good thing. So, kind of talk through board discussion. Anything, board members, that anyone would like to bring up tonight?
I'm not going to make it over to Health and Ed this evening. I have a different event, and it's on an issue that hopefully is not a part of our school system, but we shouldn't ever take anything for granted. I'll attend later this evening an event on human trafficking, and the idea is human trafficking that is occurring in and around our neighborhoods or in our area. And if that is the case, it is something that would potentially affect minors. And so our counseling staff and our SROs and even our teachers and all of our staff, we shouldn't take anything for granted in the ever-changing landscape that we are in here culturally. So,
Always looking to protect our children.
Indeed.
One thing that we don't need to do right now, but we had 1/2 assistant principal position in the new budget, 15-16. We've been looking at it, Mr. Zago, Ms. Barnes, myself, and all, since that time. And this would be an internal transfer after budget's approved. Really like to hire one more assistant principal, and I'd like to place a new 1/2 at Smyrna Middle School, a new 1/2 position at Whitworth Buchanan Middle, their numbers are going up, and a 1/2 probably at Smyrna Elementary School, which is high numbers of ESL, lots of movement in and out and that sort of thing, which would, the ratio, you remember, for Buffalo County is 1 to 300 and something. Most everybody else was in the 200s or under 200 in many instances. So that's something that, if y'all will approve that after we get a budget, when we come back and have to do anything like that, that's an amendment thing and not from your certified position.
Have we ever talked about the ratio of students that flow through our system, that, they're here in 1st of August, but...
Mobility rates is the term that they use.
Is that the term?
Most schools track that, and they can track it fairly easy with their attendance software, because it'll separate about how many you're entering, how many are withdrawing, and you look at those percentages, and the high transfer areas tends to be associated with higher, with the socioeconomic, more free reduced. It tends to be, again, not as much home ownership, and they tend to move more often. So we see higher mobility typically the Smyrna Laverne area, and sometimes in other areas, but that's, it's fairly high in some schools.
And that may be something that the board
Would
would
like to see sometime.
at some point in time, too. So. In Health Ed tonight, budget tomorrow, full commission meeting Friday morning at 9. Anything else to come before this work session? We'll see y'all again Thursday night. We stand adjourned.